You know the street before you see it. It reaches you first as a thickness in the air, something warm and wet that slides into your nose and sits there like a hand over your mouth. Not one smell, but layers of them, pressed together by heat, by bodies, by rot, by the slow failure of anything to stay clean for long. Human waste, animal dung, old straw soaked with urine, sour ale spilled into mud, fish scales going soft in a basket, blood drying black outside a butcher's stall, smoke from cheap firewood that never quite masks what lies beneath it. You take one breath, then a second, and by the third, your body is already trying to protect itself. Your throat tightens, your stomach flinches, your eyes water, not from grief or smoke alone, but from the sheer insult of the air. This is not the clean stone fantasy of medieval life that later centuries like to paint. No glowing market square, no charming lane where the scent of bread floats pleasantly from a baker's door. Bread exists, yes, so do herbs, rushes, incense, and the occasional sweetness of fruit. But these do not rule the street. They are swallowed by a heavier kingdom of filth, labor, and waste. The town is alive in the biological sense, and that means it leaks, it sweats, it swells, it dumps its fluids where it can. The dead do not always leave quickly. The living cannot stop producing mess. Every alley becomes a record of what bodies have done there. You step carefully, but there is no careful enough. The ground under your shoes is not solid earth. It is a mixture, mud kneaded with dung, ash, kitchen scraps, bits of straw, rags, broken pottery. Slop poured from an upper window by someone who shouted a warning, or perhaps forgot. A dog noses through it. A pig chews where a child nearly slipped. Somewhere close by, a gutter moves sluggishly with water that is no longer only water. It carries washings, chamber pot waste, and whatever the rain had the decency to loosen. In dry weather, the stink bakes upward. In wet weather, it spreads. And the true cruelty is this. You cannot simply stop breathing. Your body wants distance from corruption, but daily life gives you none. If plague is in town, then the ordinary world has turned treacherous. The door latch everyone touches, the breadboard, the shared bench, the sleeve that brushes yours in the lane. The coins pass damp from palm to palm, the bucket handle, the church rail, the cart wheel slick with street filth. Every object seems to carry a memory of someone else's skin, someone else's breath, someone else's sickness. Even comfort is dangerous. A warm room may be poorly aired, a blanket may have wrapped a feverish body, a neighbor's kindness may arrive coughing. You keep moving because everyone else does. That may be the darkest part. The town does not pause to let you be afraid. A bell rings. A woman haggles over onions. A laborer shoulders a sack through the crush. A priest lifts his robes out of the muck and still cannot keep them clean. Somewhere, a man vomits into the gutter, and somebody steps around him because there is work to do. That is how terror begins here, not with drama, but with routine. Not with a scream, but with the fact that morning still requires you to walk outside and place your body among other bodies. By the first hour, survival already feels uncertain. Not because death has announced itself with ceremony, but because the whole town seems built to enter you through the senses first, through the nose, through the mouth, through the hand that steadies itself on the wrong wall, through the simple fact that to live here at all, you must keep touching the world that may be killing you. The street does not belong to you. It belongs to everyone at once. You wake in air that has already been used by other lungs. Inside the house, privacy is a luxury, and distance is fantasy. People sleep close because walls are expensive. Rooms are few, and warmth matters. Bodies share space with tools. Rush mats, sacks of grain, damp clothing. And sometimes animals kept near for practical reasons that make sense until the smell reminds you what practicality costs. The floor holds yesterday's dirt, and the dirt was carried in from lanes where humans and livestock passed through the same mud. Smoke from the hearth clings to the rafters, settling into cloth and hair. A chamber pot may stand only a few steps from where food is prepared. Even a careful household fights a losing battle against seepage, insects, dampness, and whatever the street has already brought inside on shoes and hems. Outside, the town squeezes people together with the stubbornness of stone walls and custom. Streets are narrow not because no one noticed the inconvenience, but because towns grew around need, around old property lines, around defense, around habit. Upper stories lean outward. Sunlight struggles to enter. Air moves badly. What sound there is gets trapped and multiplied. Hooves on packed ground, vendors calling, infants crying, a cough that lingers too long. Someone hammering metal, someone retching in an alley, somewhere close. A cart creaks under the weight of barrels or firewood and forces everyone against the wall. Your shoulder rubs a stranger's wool sleeve, greasy with use. You do not know where that sleeve has been. You do not know where yours has. The market offers no relief. It gathers the whole logic of survival into one contaminated knot. Here is meat, fish, salt, grain, onions, leeks, beans, coarse bread, cheap cloth, rope, candles, maybe a little cheese if fortune is kind. Here are fingers pressing fruit for softness, hands weighing loaves, mouths speaking close over counters, baskets set down in mud, dogs circling for scraps, flies landing where they please. A butcher wipes his blade. A fishmonger rinses a table. A customer sneezes into a hand and reaches for coins. A child grips the same stall edge as a laborer with cracked and filthy knuckles. The goods are necessary, but necessity means compromise. You do not inspect the world for purity. You inspect it for whether it is still usable. Tools pass from one person to another because they must. Shared buckets, shared knives, shared cups, shared benches, shared work surfaces. A millstone does not care whose grain it grinds. An oven takes every family's dough in turn. A public well gathers everyone who can still walk. The rope is touched by dozens of hands. The bucket rim brushes whatever vessel people bring from home. Inns and alehouses press strangers shoulder to shoulder because thirst and loneliness both spend money. You drink from a cup that has known more mouths than you care to imagine, wiped perhaps on cloth that only redistributes yesterday's grease and saliva. And you cannot simply remove yourself from this human tide, because medieval life is an economy of constant motion. If you are poor, absence means hunger. If you work by the day, staying home may mean losing the little coin that keeps bread on the table. If you are a woman running a household, the labor does not pause because fear has sharpened. Water must still be fetched. Food must still be bought or cooked. Linen must still be rinsed. Children must still be watched, though children themselves move through town like quick little carriers of everything adults have touched. If you are an apprentice, a servant, a porter, a washerwoman, a carter, a brewer, a tanner, a maid, a baker's helper, your body is not your own to isolate with. It belongs to work, and work belongs to survival. Even the wealthy are not free in the way later imagination assumes. Better walls, more servants, cleaner linen, perhaps. Yet their houses depend on traffic too. Deliveries arrive. Messengers knock. Clerks handle records. Priests visit. Servants shop in the same markets and return, carrying the same invisible cargo as everyone else. Rank changes comfort, but not human interdependence. A town is a machine made of contact. That is why ordinary objects become unsettling. The latch on a workshop door shines from years of hands. The stair rail feels polished by skin. A church bench carries wax, dust, wool fibers, crumbs, and the closeness of kneeling bodies. At the public fountain, women stand hip to hip trading news while water splashes over stone already slick with algae and waste. In theory, you could avoid some people, some alleys, some houses. In practice, town life keeps narrowing your choices until they are hardly choices at all. People do try to manage risk in the ways they understand. They open shutters, they scatter herbs, they sweep, they pray, they complain about bad smells and foul neighbors and stagnant corners where filth collects. Laws may exist against dumping waste in certain places, against keeping ditches clogged, against throwing refuse where it blocks passage. But laws are not magic, and enforcement struggles against overcrowding, poverty, and the simple daily volume of bodies producing mess faster than anyone can remove it. The street is a living argument between order and overflow usually wins by dusk, so you keep going where you must go. Through markets, past workshops, into shared rooms, across courtyards, along walls damp with old weather and older residue. You touch what the town requires you to touch because refusing would mean stepping out of life itself. That is the cruel arithmetic. Contact is danger. Contact is also bread, labor, water, shelter, worship, and news. To survive one threat, you must accept another with both hands. By midday, hunger begins negotiating with disgust. You do not eat because food is trustworthy. You eat because an empty stomach makes every other danger worse. Work weakens you. Cold drains you. Fear itself seems to consume strength. So you reach for what the town can offer. And what it offers is never clean in the modern sense, only familiar enough to risk. Bread is the center of it. Dark, coarse, heavy bread, made from rye, barley, maslin, or whatever grain can be spared. Sometimes it smells nutty and warm. Sometimes it carries a faint dampness from poor storage. The sour whisper of flour that spent too long in a bin, or the bitter trace of grain harvested in bad weather. In leaner times, flour is stretched with peas, beans, bran, or whatever keeps the loaf from disappearing entirely. If harvests have failed or supplies are thin, quality drops hard. Grain can mold in storehouses. Rats and mice get into sacks. Dust, chaff, husks, and insect fragments become part of the daily texture. You tear off a piece and chew anyway, because chewing is still better than going lightheaded before sunset. Porridge is safer for some, dangerous in its own quieter way for others. It fills the belly and softens poor grains, but it depends on water, and water is rarely innocent. The public well may stand in the center of town like a promise of life, but promises in a medieval town are always mixed with compromise. Wells can be fouled by runoff, by careless dumping, by seepage from privies, by the ordinary filth of dense habitation. Cisterns grow stagnant. Barrels used for carrying water may not be thoroughly cleaned between uses. A bucket lowered again and again by many hands is a public object, and public objects collect what the whole town gives them. Water can look clear and still carry the memory of everything around it. That is part of why ale matters so much. Small ale, weak enough for regular drinking, becomes a practical daily liquid not because medieval people were permanently drunk, but because brewing transforms water through boiling and fermentation, ways they experience as more dependable. Yet even here, safety is not simple. Ale goes sour. Brewing vessels can be dirty. Storage casks can be tainted. A cup passed across a rough table in an alehouse is still touched by hands that spent the morning handling coins. Dung-streaked cartwheels, tools, raw meat, and faces damp from coughing. You drink because thirst is immediate, and because mild ale provides calories the body can feel. It may also carry residue from a world you would rather not picture too clearly. Then there is meat, the great temptation and the great uncertainty. Fresh meat is not an everyday luxury for everyone. More often you meet it salted, smoked, preserved, stretched, or sold in smaller portions than appetite would choose. Butchers work fast because flesh does not wait. In cool weather, that helps. In heat, time becomes an enemy you can almost smell. Blood pools, congeals, and draws flies. Cutting boards hold deep grooves darkened by repeated use. Knives are wiped, not sterilized. Hands move from carcass to counter to coin. Offal may be eaten because waste is expensive. Sausages hide much and reveal little. Stews make older ingredients more forgiving. You learn not to ask too much of your nose. Fish offers the same bargain with different consequences. In river towns and coastal regions it is common enough, especially on fast days when the church forbids meat. Fresh fish must move quickly from catch to table, and quick is not always possible. Salted fish can last, though not gracefully. Dried fish can feed you while punishing your mouth. Market stalls carry the unmistakable odor of scales, brine, slime, and slow decay. Yet fish is protein. Fish is trade. Fish is what is available. So you buy it, scrape it, cook it, and hope the fire outruns whatever has begun inside the flesh. Dairy lives dangerously too. Milk spoils fast. So much of it becomes cheese, curds, or butter. Soft dairy can turn on you in warm weather. Harder cheeses keep longer. Though their rinds may gather the grime of transport and handling, eggs are precious and fragile. Crack one open and the judgment must be immediate. Does it smell usable or not? Medieval survival depends less on ideal food than on constant triage. The kitchen does not rescue you from these risks. It only rearranges them. Fire kills some dangers, concentrates others. A pot may simmer all day, receiving additions from different hours and different levels of freshness. Hands reach in, stir, taste, wipe, return. Cutting surfaces absorb yesterday's juices. Storage jars keep out some pests and welcome others. A cloth laid over bread protects it from dust while collecting flies. Smoke cures meat, but smoke also settles into rafters black with grease. Cats help control vermin, yet vermin still gnaw sacks in the night. You live in a chain of partial protections, not clean victories. Shared eating makes everything more intimate than comfort would prefer. A loaf is broken by several hands. A spoon dips into a common pot. A cup goes from mouth to mouth. In a household of servants, laborers, kin or lodgers. Meals happen by proximity and routine, not by hygienic caution. The body of one person crosses into the survival of another with startling ease. Saliva on a cup rim, fingernails touching crust. A cough turns slightly aside, but not far enough. If someone is sick, the table does not always reveal it at once. Illness can sit upright, speak gently, even reach for more stew before it collapses later that night. Still, you cannot stop eating. That is what makes this world so punishing. Every source of nourishment comes wrapped in some degree of risk, and those risks remain unavoidable because malnutrition is its own executioner. Hunger makes labor impossible. Weakness makes illness harder to resist. Children cannot be fed on caution alone. Older people cannot survive on principle, even in households that know danger is everywhere. The body demands bread, broth, ale, onions, beans, cabbage, and whatever scraps of fat or protein can be gathered into a tolerable meal. So you keep lifting food to your mouth. You keep drawing water or ale from containers touched by others. You keep trusting barrels, ovens, and cooking pots because there is no alternative grand enough to replace them. Survival is not a clean decision here. It is a series of necessary swallowings. The town feeds you with one hand and contaminates you with the other. And your body must accept both if it wants to see morning again. Safety in this town is something people perform. You can see it in the herbs hung by a doorway, in the bundle of rosemary tucked into a sleeve, in the woman who presses lavender to her nose as though fragrance itself were a wall against corruption. You see it in smoke rising from braziers, in rushes scattered across floors, in vinegar held up like a defense, in prayers murmured over sickbeds and thresholds. None of this is foolish in the simple sense. It is a response to a world that feels biologically hostile even when its true mechanics remain hidden. People know that foul air seems to cling to sickness. They know rot and dampness make the body miserable. They know certain places feel dangerous before they can explain why. So they build protection from what knowledge they do possess, and from fear, which supplies the rest. The medieval obsession with bad air is not invented out of nothing. You understand it the moment you enter a cramped room where a feverish person has been sweating into wool blankets for 2 days. The air is stale, heavy, almost greasy. A basin of waste sits nearby. The shutters are half closed against cold. Someone has burned juniper, or rosemary, or pitch to cleanse the room, but the smoke only lays one assault over another. If sickness seems to travel with stink, then bad smells begin to feel like active agents, invisible hunters entering through the nose. That belief shapes everything. Streets are condemned for foulness. Stagnant places are feared. Perfumes, incense, and aromatic woods become more than comforts. They become moral architecture, little scented barricades against death. Yet smell is a poor detective. A place can stink and not kill you today. A blanket can look harmless and still carry danger. People chase what the senses can grasp, which means they often fight symptoms of contamination rather than the pathways that matter most. Smoke a room, yes. Sweeten the air, yes. Carry flowers, yes. But the fleas in cloth do not care about your herbs. The fabric of a sleeve does not become clean because it smells like rosemary. A corpse washed with piety still remains a biological threat. False confidence enters quietly through rituals that make fear feel organized. This is where myth needs untangling. Medieval people were not universally filthy in the cartoon sense that later ages enjoy mocking. They washed faces and hands. They valued clean linen. They noticed stench. They wrote laws about dumping waste, regulating butchers, cleaning streets, and managing water. Bathing existed, though its frequency depended on wealth, region, season, available fuel, and changing social attitudes. Public bathhouses operated in many towns. Soap existed. Laundering existed. Grooming existed. The problem is not that people were too stupid to notice dirt. The problem is that they lived in environments where cleanliness was labor-intensive, temporary, and constantly under siege from overcrowding, animals, dampness, shared infrastructure, and limited understanding of disease. A clean shirt is a triumph, not a permanent condition. Linen worn under outer garments absorbs sweat and can be washed more often than wool. But washing requires water, labor, soap, time, and somewhere to dry cloth that may never fully lose the smell of smoke or the memory of the house. Hair can be combed and covered, yet lice treat effort as a minor inconvenience. Bedding can be shaken, aired, restuffed, and still become a colony for insects. Floors can be swept while corners continue breeding vermin. A person may scrub a bowl and then refill it with water drawn from a compromised source. Hygiene exists, but it exists inside the limits of physics, poverty, and imperfect knowledge. Medicine offers comfort, authority, and danger in uneven portions. Learned medicine draws on classical theories of humors, balance, and regimen. Too much heat, too much cold, excess moisture, corrupted air. blocked evacuations of the body. A skilled practitioner may recommend diet changes, purges, bloodletting, rest, warming spices, cooling syrups, or careful observation of symptoms. Sometimes these responses soothe the body. Sometimes they weaken it exactly when strength is most needed. Bloodletting is a special cruelty in this respect. It feels active. It looks serious. It gives the illusion that something harmful is being removed. Yet for a body already fighting fever and collapse, the loss of blood may be one more theft. Herbal remedies range from sensible to desperate. Sage, garlic, rue, wormwood, mint, hyssop, and a small forest of local knowledge enter the sick room as teas, poultices, washes, or fumigations. Some may ease pain, some may settle the stomach, some may mildly disinfect a wound or freshen a room, but relief is not the same as rescue. The body can smell cleaner while dying. A fever can break for an hour and return harder. A swelling can be bound, lanced, prayed over, or rubbed with compounds that sting impressively and cure nothing at all. Then there are charms, relics, pilgrimages, written prayers folded into clothing, saints invoked for intercession, amulets worn against sickness, processions meant to turn divine anger aside. From a modern distance, it is easy to smirk, but fear does not respect centuries. When entire households fall ill and even learned men disagree, symbolic control becomes precious. Faith gives shape to helplessness. It transforms invisible threat into something that can at least be addressed. Confession, penance, fasting, almsgiving, and prayer do not merely seek a miracle. They make suffering legible. They tell people that terror belongs inside a structure, even if that structure cannot block a flea bite or cleanse a shared mattress. The darkest irony lies in how remedies can crowd the senses with the theater of protection while leaving the main danger untouched. A room grows fragrant with herbs, smoky with incense, crowded with whispered prayers, warm compresses, and the solemn confidence of treatment. Meanwhile, clothing passes from body to body. Bedding stays in use. Caregivers lean close. Neighbors visit. Waste accumulates. Hands move from forehead to bowl, to blanket, to door latch. Someone believes the air has been corrected because it smells sweeter now. The room feels managed. Death often disagrees. And still, you understand why people keep trying. To live in a medieval town during plague is to inhabit uncertainty so total that doing nothing feels like surrender. So they wash what they can, air what they can, burn what they can, bleed, purge, bind, pray, carry, sprinkle, and fumigate. They build order out of gesture. Some gestures genuinely help at the margins. Many do not, but all of them reveal the same human instinct. Faced with a world where danger enters through contact, breath, cloth, vermin, and chance, people reach for any practice that lets them believe their hands are not completely empty. Death does not enter town like an army. It arrives like a habit. At first it seems attached to ordinary things. A blanket that smelled a little too sour. A room that felt too close. A rat glimpsed under grain sacks. A bite unnoticed on the ankle. A cough dismissed because everyone coughs in crowded places. A neighbor who looked tired yesterday and cannot stand today. Medieval people did not possess your vocabulary for pathogens, vectors, or microbial transmission, but they recognized a pattern more terrifying than explanation. Once sickness took hold, it traveled through the fabric of daily life with a speed that made every object feel suspect. In some outbreaks, fleas riding on rats likely played a major role, especially where grain storage, vermin, and dense habitation created ideal conditions. In others, transmission may also have been helped along by human parasites, close bodily contact, contaminated clothing, and In certain forms of plague, respiratory spread through coughing and proximity. Historians still debate exact proportions in different places and moments, and that uncertainty is part of the horror. People did not need perfect theory to understand the result. The town itself had become a machine for passing danger from one body to another. You feel it first as rumor lodged inside your muscles. Someone on your lane has swellings. Someone near the market died faster than expected. A servant in a respectable house collapsed. A child with fever was buried at dusk. Then rumor becomes sound. Church bells. The wheels of a cart moving at the wrong hour. Hammering for another coffin. A priest called in haste. A woman wailing behind a shutter. The town develops a pulse of interruption, and every interruption teaches your nerves a new shape of dread. The symptoms, when they come, are grotesquely persuasive. Fever rises hot and sudden, not the modest warmth of a common illness, but a punishing internal fire. Head pain grows heavy. Limbs ache with a depth that makes even straw bedding feel abrasive. Then come the swellings, often in the groin, armpit, or neck. Painful nodes that turn the body into a map of inflamed terror. Skin can discolor into dark blotches or mottled bruising as the blood itself seems to betray its own borders. The sick may vomit, grow delirious, struggle to drink, moan with thirst, or toss against blankets that have become torture devices. Breath changes, speech frays. Some bodies fight for days. Some seem to fall apart in a single, terrible rush. And plague is rarely alone. It moves through households already weakened by poor diet, old infections, cold, parasites, hard labor, childbirth, injury, and the general wearing down produced by medieval poverty. A strong body may endure longer. A weak one has less to bargain with. Children burn quickly. The elderly fade brutally. Women recovering from birth or miscarriage carry private vulnerabilities no street chronicler can fully count. Laborers cannot simply surrender to bed rest at the first sign of sickness, which means the ill may keep moving through workshops, kitchens, yards, and alleys while still touching the world that supports them. Clothing becomes sinister in this climate. Wool cloaks, linen shifts, caps, gloves, belts, and boots all absorb sweat, dirt, fleas, and the residue of contact. A garment passed down, borrowed, sold, or reused may carry more than the smell of its last owner. Bedding is worse. Straw mattresses, blankets, coverlets, pallets on the floor, feather beds in richer homes. All of them hold warmth, moisture, insects, and biological traces. To lie down is to enter a history of bodies. To care for a sick relative is to lean into that history with bare hands and hope. Even when people suspect that infected goods are dangerous, necessity pushes against caution. Blankets cost money. Clothing is repaired, inherited, traded, and reused because fabric is survival, not decoration. Corpses transform fear into logistics. A dead body is not just mourned, it must be handled, washed, wrapped, carried, prayed over, buried. In calmer times, these acts affirm community. During plague, they acquire an edge of revulsion and panic. Who lifts the body? Who closes the eyes? Who strips the bed? Who touches the gown, the hair, the straw darkened by sweat? In some places, burial practices change under the pressure of numbers. Graves multiply. Ceremonies shorten. Familiar rites become hurried, incomplete, or impossible. The dead leave not only grief behind them, but rooms full of objects no one is certain how to trust again. Respiratory terror sharpens everything. When plague takes a form that reaches the lungs, closeness becomes even more lethal. A cough in a narrow room can empty courage from every witness. Breath, the one thing no one can postpone, becomes morally loaded. You begin hearing lungs as threats, a throat clearing across the table, a fit of coughing behind church pillars, a wet gasp from the pallet beside you. The intimacy of human air, once merely unavoidable, now feels like an assault. In a crowded town, there is no grand answer to this. People still sleep near one another. They still share rooms, walls, prayers, tears, and the same bad oxygen. Panic changes how the town reads the body. A flushed face is not just fatigue anymore. A stumble is not just drunkenness. A swollen neck, a sudden fever, a complaint of pain under the arms, all become social alarms. People inspect one another while pretending not to. They watch windows. They count absences at work. They note who has stopped coming to market. Suspicion attaches itself to houses first, then to families, then to professions that force close contact. Caregivers become brave and feared at the same time. Priests, washerwomen, grave diggers, nurses, servants, and kin all stand near the fire because someone must. Yet even at the center of all this, the plague preserves its maddening element of chance. One person handles the sick and survives. Another avoids obvious danger and dies in 2 days. One house is stripped nearly bare while the next remains untouched for reasons no one can explain. That randomness corrodes confidence more thoroughly than certainty ever could. If filth alone caused death, then cleanliness might save you. If bad people died and pious people lived, then morality might shield you. But plague often ignores such arrangements. It enters respectable homes, poor hovels, monasteries, workshops, and merchant houses with humiliating indifference. So the town keeps breathing, trading, praying, burying, and guessing while death moves through cloth, fleas, filth, closeness, and air. No trumpet announces its next victim. No wall fully stops it. You begin to understand that the true ruler of the place is not king, bishop, or council, but circulation itself. Everything moves. Bodies, goods, pests, breath, rumor, bedding, coins, carts, hands, waste, and grief. That movement keeps the town alive. It also keeps handing death new doors to enter. Fear changes the town faster than law ever could. You see it in the hesitation before a knock is answered, in the way people step half a pace back without admitting they have done it, in the pause that follows a cough, when every face briefly reveals the same calculation. Who have you touched? Where have you been? What have you carried into this room? Suspicion becomes the new common language, spoken mostly through silence, through glances, through doors left closed a little longer than kindness would normally allow. Family life narrows under that pressure. Affection becomes a risk measured in inches. A mother still lifts a feverish child because love does not vanish when fear arrives. But her hands shake for reasons beyond grief. Husbands and wives watch one another for signs they do not want to name. Children are hushed not only to keep order, but because noise itself feels like strain placed on a house already full of dread. The ordinary comforts of touch begin to decay. A hand on the shoulder, a shared cup, sleeping near another body for warmth. All of it feels altered, stripped of innocence. Care remains necessary, but it no longer feels safe. For the poor, fear is not a separate burden. It is woven directly into the labor of staying alive. A laborer cannot quarantine in principle while rent, food, and fuel continue demanding coin. A washerwoman still handles soiled linen because stained cloth does not care about plague theory. A maid still empties waste, scrubs boards, carries water, and enters sick rooms if ordered. A carter still hauls goods through lanes where people stare at one another like possible omens. The wealthy may fear contamination, but the poor are forced to serve inside it. Their courage is often simply the absence of any alternative. Women carry a brutal share of invisible exposure, Much of the work that sustains life happens through their hands. Feeding the household, washing bodies, preparing broths, cleaning waste, changing bedding, sitting with the ill when others drift away. They become the managers of contamination in a world that offers them few true tools of protection. If the sick recover, their labor is absorbed into duty. If the sick die, their closeness becomes one more danger remembered too late. Medieval records often note deaths, wills, labor shortages, and public responses. But the thousands of private acts of female care vanish into the walls that witnessed them. Children suffer in their own merciless category. They do not understand why adults suddenly recoil. They still run toward warmth, toward laps, toward familiar hands. They touch what is near. They wipe noses on sleeves. They sleep deeply beside siblings. When sickness enters, they are trapped inside decisions made by others. Some are orphaned. Some are left in houses that have lost order completely. Some survive by becoming quiet early, learning that asking for comfort may bring panic instead of embrace. There is a special cruelty in a town where the instinct to protect children survives, but the means to protect them have thinned almost to nothing. Caregivers and the isolated occupy opposite ends of the same wound. On one side are those forced into closeness with the sick. On the other are those abandoned by it. An old man with no strong family nearby may disappear inside his own room until a neighbor notices the silence. A widow may fall ill and find that help arrives late because everyone is helping badly elsewhere. Servants can be dismissed to reduce risk, then left to face hunger with their wages cut short. The town remembers status until plague exposes how little status matters when bodies begin failing alone. Identity itself begins to fray. You are no longer simply a baker, a widow, a porter, a child, a priest, a wife. You become a household with illness, a lane with deaths, a face that looks too pale, a man who buried 2 sons, a woman whose house people avoid. Reputation bends around sickness. Even grief becomes socially dangerous. Too much public sorrow can imply contagion nearby. Too much secrecy suggests worse. People learn to manage appearances while their inner lives turn raw. And yet, human resilience does not disappear. It changes form. It becomes smaller, grimmer, less romantic. A bowl of broth left at a threshold. Fresh straw carried in by someone who does not stay. A prayer spoken from the yard instead of the bedside. A neighbor who agrees to help bury the dead because no one else will. A child distracted with a scrap of bread while adults whisper over what must be done next. These are not victories. They are fragments of decency surviving inside a system that has made ordinary tenderness feel dangerous. That is what fear does in a plague town. It does not merely frighten you. It edits human behavior at the most intimate level. It turns closeness into calculation, care into exposure, poverty into a death sentence with extra steps, and daily identity into something fragile enough to be rewritten by one fever. The forgotten lives are not forgotten because they mattered less. They are forgotten because the town demanded their labor, consumed their bodies, and moved on before memory could keep up. In the end, the town does not save you. Its walls keep out raiders. Perhaps its guilds regulate trade. Its churches organize prayer. Its laws threaten fines for filth, blocked drains, spoiled meat, and careless dumping. Its markets feed the living, and its graveyards receive the dead. Yet when plague saturates daily life, the system reveals its limits with humiliating clarity. The same structures that make medieval town life possible also help make it vulnerable. Crowding, shared labor, reused cloth, narrow lanes, public wells, common ovens, busy markets, and households packed tight with need-or-bind survival to exposure. That is why endurance matters more than order. You survive, if you do survive, not because the world around you is well designed for health, but because your body holds out a little longer, because your household is spared one more week, because a flea bites someone else, because your work lets you avoid one room and forces you into another, because chance places its hand on your shoulder and then, for reasons of its own, lets go. Luck sits beside labor in every medieval plague town, and often luck has the stronger vote. What plague changes is larger than the body count. It alters trust. It teaches communities that closeness can kill. It reshapes labor when workers die faster than they can be replaced. It changes prayer by forcing people to ask why piety did not guarantee safety. It changes memory by filling it with names, absences, houses avoided, bells heard too often, and the permanent knowledge that daily life itself can turn hostile, even when the worst wave passes. The habits of fear do not vanish overnight. People remember which streets stank worst, which families disappeared, which remedies failed, and how thin the line was between household routine and sudden ruin. What this world reveals is not that medieval people were uniquely dirty, foolish, or doomed. It reveals something harder to dismiss. Human beings are resilient enough to keep buying bread in dangerous markets, washing the sick with trembling hands, sleeping beside fear, and waking to do it again. But resilience is not invincibility. In a plague town, touch becomes a wager, breath becomes a warning, and survival becomes a negotiation between the body and everything the world keeps pressing against it.